conflict is normal. It's a normal part of any relationship. But what we know that the masters of relationship are doing differently than the disasters, or that they actually have effective ways of repairing the conflict. So the conflict that's naturally coming up in any relationship, and some couples have much higher levels, than others, but they still have, high levels of happiness and good outcomes. But it's because they've got really good repair processes in place.
Welcome to Thoughtful Money. I'm its founder and your host, Adam Taggart. We're going to do something a little different in today's video. This Thoughtful Money channel is all about wealth building, so it makes sense that we focus most of our attention on money. But money is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. No one's goal in life is to die atop a big pile of cash. Instead, we hope to use our money to better enjoy the things that really feed our souls. As those who live to be 100 years old tell us, true wealth, the things that really matter in life, are a function of the following three things: fulfilling relationships, purpose, and health. So, as a number of you have asked for, I'm going to periodically interview experts on each of these key topics. And today, we're going to focus on what makes for successful, happy relationships. To help us understand what makes or breaks the important relationships in our lives, I've invited a professional marriage and family therapist to speak with us today. Ashley is a licensed MFT trained in emotion-focused therapy, otherwise known as EFT, and the Gottman method of couples therapy. Doctors John and Julie Gottman were made famous by Malcolm Gladwell's coverage of them in his book Blink, describing how they could predict with near 90% accuracy whether or not a couple will remain together after interviewing them for only 3 minutes. In her California practice, Ashley deals with clients from all backgrounds, many of whom are Silicon Valley power couples, though she also sees her fair share of rural farmers too. I'd be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge that Ashley is my wife. So I can personally vouch for both her professional credentials as well as the effectiveness of the strategies for conflict resolution that she'll share with us in today's discussion, because we've put plenty of them to use in our own marriage, which just celebrated its 24th anniversary last week. Ash, thanks so much for letting me talk you into doing this.
Great. Excited to be here.
Thanks. All right, this should be fun. We did something like this a couple years ago, but we haven't done it for Thoughtful Money. And like I said, people have really been asking for me to veer a little bit outside the lines of just money and get into some of these other bigger topics of what really matters. So thank you for coming on and helping us delve here into the relationship side of things, which really does seem to be kind of the top of the pyramid. Humans are we are tribal animals, really at our core evolutionarily, and that still manifests in our lives on a daily basis. So, what I'd like to talk with you about today, obviously, is how can we have successful, fulfilling relationships? And in your practice, you talk with a lot of couples, and it seems like the things that really trip people up couples-wise are the big four, right? Money, sex, children, and then in-laws, I guess, is sort of the fourth, right? So I guess diving in here, I got a lot of questions for you, but why don't we just start so people can hopefully see themselves in your answers here, because nobody's relationships are perfect, obviously.
Right.
How common is conflict in a relationship?
It's just part of a relationship. It's really common. It's really normal. It's one of the things that we're always trying to, help couples understand a little bit better, is that the conflict doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be something that you avoid. It doesn't have to, in fact, should be something that you kind of learn to work with and use as like a tool in your relationship to understand one another better. So it's very, very normal. But, sadly, a lot of us have not great histories with conflict. There's good reasons why people maybe want to avoid conflict because of how they grew up, what was role modeled for them, what it represented. But when couples can really learn how to make conflict, learn that conflict is something that can be healthy in a relationship, it really changes the whole experience.
Yeah, conflict is essentially, it's in, again, I say this as somebody who's been trained by my therapist spouse, but it's really your sign that there's a chance to grow the relationship. Oh, here's a part of the relationship that isn't as buttoned up as I thought it was, or I'm learning something new about the relationship here. So let me lean into this and figure out what's causing this so that we can actually repair and even be stronger going forward. Um, and I know a lot of times too, the conflict, at least on the surface, oftentimes, what the conflict about is on the surface, the trigger that maybe created the conflict. Like 9 times out of 10, that's not the issue. The issue is one of these
Right.
underlying things that's rooted in, again, a childhood or the meaning this has taken on for us over the journey of our life or whatever. So,
Mhm.
big part is trying to see beyond just the, oh, I did this and it triggered you to, hey, what's really the core of what's going on here?
Right,
Um,
right.
so there's something that I remember learning from the Gottman couples sessions that you have dragged me to in the past, um,
Oh,
where
wait, you mean the like the workshops, not the,
yes,
I mean, the sessions, yeah, I didn't have to drag you to.
no, but
The
yes,
workshops, maybe I dragged you. Yeah.
yeah, and just full disclosure for folks, a therapist has to do continuing education, and so sometimes Ashley has to go to these workshops, and they're couples workshops. So obviously, as the other side of the couple, I've got to go to these things with her. But one thing that they mentioned that I think really helped me kind of reframe relationships. Of course, this one's around your life partner choice, but it's the same with your other relationships, which is um, the difference between uh, fixable problems and perpetual problems. And Gottman basically says, like, in a relationship, about 80% of the problems are perpetual problems, meaning it's just how the people are, right? So, for example, if I'm an extrovert and I get married to an introvert, and it kind of bothers me a little bit that my introverted spouse isn't the life of the party when we go out for cocktails, um, that's probably never going to change over the course of our relationship. That introvert is not magically going to
Right.
become an extrovert, right? And so you need to realize which problems are perpetual, right? You need to do the work to figure out the distinction, and then basically ask yourself, can I live with those in this relationship? And so in many ways, the choice of a spouse is choosing somebody whose perpetual problems that you can live with. And for many people watching this, it's probably too late. They're already married, right? They've inherited whatever problem set they're going to be having to deal with. But if you look at it as, oh, wait a minute, this problem isn't fixable, so let me stop trying to fix it and let me actually start trying to manage it. The dynamic can really shift and become a lot more constructive, right? Because if you're just keeping trying to fix somebody on something that's not going to change, you're setting both of yourself up for a lot of frustration.
Yeah, and I think it's about, kind of understanding um what the bigger picture is for you. Like if you're getting triggered in a situation, to really understand what's happening for me, like what's the story that I'm telling myself about that situation around whatever, my partner might be doing. Um, and is it something that I can talk to my partner about? Does it feel safe enough to bring it up? And what happens with, a lot of couples that are coming into my office is they haven't had a lot of success in having successful conversations around these issues. Like you said, most of them are perpetual issues. They haven't had a lot of success in figuring out how to have those conversations in a way that feels constructive. So they end up avoiding them, right? And then they tend to blow up at some point.
Yep. All right. Well, look, let's talk about how, you know, somebody like you meets somebody like that in the sense of where they are. As you said, a lot of couples, probably their issue is they don't know how to talk through the conflict, right?
Mhm.
For reasons you mentioned, maybe it's dynamics, uh, conflict wasn't something that was allowed to be discussed in your family, or whatever the soup of psychological background context is. um, they're just not meeting each other well on this stuff. And then, of course, trying to have the conversation can make things worse, at that point in time. So, I mentioned in the introduction that you are a student of both Gottman's therapy methodology as well as EFT. And I think in EFT, there's, again, I'm the armchair guy here, but there's something called the negative cycle, which I think is probably what people get stuck in by the time that they come to talk to you. So,
Right.
how do you help them try to break out of that negative cycle?
Well, the first step is always just we have to understand it first. We have to kind of organize it and make sense of it for them. So that's and this is I would say it's part of EFT. It's probably part of most couples therapies, regardless of the orientation. But it's just every couple kind of has their own unique negative cycle. Nobody is exempt from it. So every couple co-creates some kind of dynamic, and so it's just about helping two partners really understand what their dance looks like. What are the moves that each of them are making that lead to escalation, that lead to where they get into a stuck place. So just helping them understand the triggers, helping them understand the emotions that they both experience, helping them understand kind of the meaning that they both attach to it, the protective moves that they both engage in order to maintain some sense of safety and within themselves. Once couples once it starts the pieces start falling into place for them, it tends to start feeling a little less chaotic when we can kind of organize those different elements for them. But usually, with most couples, one person's protection is usually the other person's trigger. So like, what I do to protect myself might be to pull away or to withdraw or to disengage, which can be, someone else's trigger around feeling abandoned, feeling left alone, feeling, like no one's there for me when I need them. So that's just an example of, what happens in the negative cycle, and it plays out in a lot of different ways. But in couples therapy, it's just about helping the couple become more fluent in that cycle.
Okay. So again, everybody's own particular, instances are idiosyncratic and unique to them, but your job is to basically put all this stuff on the table, right? What are the things that bother you? When this happens, why are you reacting the way that you do? So it's a lot of, like I said, I think just sort of naming stuff, getting on the table. I presume that that's helpful both for your partner to understand you better. Oh, this is really what's bothering her. I didn't realize that was the case, right? Or when she does that, now maybe I'm understanding why she's doing it, and I don't see it as much of an attack on me or a rejection of me. I see it as more of a self-protection element on her, right? So there's understanding your partner better. I'm going to guess too, there's also understanding yourself better, whereas you go through this process, you might be helping the person realize, oh, I guess, yes, that is how I feel, or that is why I'm doing that. And I can see how maybe that is actually making the situation, it's complicating the situation versus making it safer for me, right? And they can
Right.
choose whether or not which of those behaviors they're currently doing to continue doing, because not all of them might serve them. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that's true. And a lot of it too is just like, just really slowing it down for people. I mean, usually when couples are in conflict or they're in distress, or they're functioning outside of their window of tolerance, which is a term I know you've heard me use a lot, which is, basically when you're in a state of fight or flight, it can feel really chaotic and really, overwhelming to be in the midst of that intensity in your relationship, especially with the person that you care the most about in the world, right? When that attachment bond is feeling threatened that way, it can feel really emotionally distressing. So part of what I'm trying to do is just, again, like I'm really trying to slow it down, break it down, help people understand, the kind of the step-by-step process that's taking place so that they can start, experiencing that in themselves. Because usually what happens when, the cycle takes over and things get so heated so quickly, we just go into our protective functions. We go into whatever we do in our fight or flight states, whether it's raging or shutting down, stonewalling. And so just trying to name it, like we say, name it to tame it, just begin to put words on these things so people can start understanding oh yeah, this is what I'm feeling. So a lot of times in therapy, we're just really trying to validate someone's experience, because usually historically their experiences maybe has been invalidated or, criticized or attacked. And what I'm just trying to, help both couples feel kind of seen and heard and understood in the process.
Okay. You've used a couple of terms here. I just want to make sure everybody understands. One, you just mentioned window of tolerance. And, as I understand that from how you've explained it to me, it is sort of, if you're within the window of tolerance, you're in an emotional state where you can kind of function, right? But if you are having a really heated, emotional discussion, usually you can go one of two ways. You can go above your window of tolerance, and that's where people call you being flooded. Like I'm just so amped up and angry, right? I can't even think straight right now. I'm just so emotionally, right? I think you said raging earlier on. That could be a symptom of that. Or you can drop below the window of tolerance, which is, I think, kind of like checking out, right? Like, yeah, you guys talk about whatever you want.
Both are states of being emotionally flooded. They just look different. One, when you're outside of the window of tolerance, you're basically, you're a different part of your brain and nervous system is kind of coming online. And we don't have access to our prefrontal cortex when we're outside of our window of tolerance. So we're in the state of fight or flight, the limbic system's taking over, we're kind of feeling it in our body. You can either be in hyperarousal, which is very emotionally overwhelmed, reactive, intense, loud, or we can be in hypoarousal, which is more of the stonewalling, the shutdown, disconnected. So, and usually in a lot of couples, we'll see, one partner will kind of go outside of the window on the upside, and the other partner goes on the downside. We call that kind of the pursuer withdrawer dynamic.
Okay.
So,
but the key thing is
common.
if you're not within your window of tolerance, it's not really constructive to try to have a conversation because you're just not thinking with your
No.
cortex, right?
Yeah. Right. And that's what happens. A lot of couples will try to keep staying in that conversation or the conflict at that point when they're outside of their window of tolerance. And that's where a lot of damage gets done. So, where really hurtful things can be said or done. And it's, it's just part of the process, but it's helping people become more aware of when we get outside of our window of tolerance, we can actually have some agreements around what happens. Like maybe we can agree that we take a time out, or maybe we can agree that, we'll come back to it once things have cooled off. But it's just helping people understand their own bodies, their own nervous systems, how emotion affects their ability to communicate their needs or inability to communicate in those moments. But the key is we never want to, have couples be engaging with one another when they're outside of their window of tolerance, because it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't end well.
Okay. So I'm going to guess that some people watching are probably beginning to see elements of their relationship dynamics in here. We've all gotten, charged in a discussion with a loved one. There's another sort of set of vocabulary that comes from Gottman, where I mentioned in the intro that they were famously covered by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink, because of their decades of experience looking at couples. They could observe a couple for like I said, like 90 seconds and have or 3 minutes and have a 90% chance of determining whether the couple's going to be together or not.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is there are these markers that they've come to look for that really spell when a relationship is in real trouble. They call them the four horsemen. I just want to name them, and if you could just briefly describe each one of them so that folks know what to look for. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So explain what they are so that folks notice they might be employing them in their relationships, because we all sometimes do to a certain extent. They can know to really be careful if those start creeping into the dynamic.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're, like you said, we all have elements of the four horsemen at times in our dynamic, but it's just, yeah, it's about becoming more aware so that we can, figure out how to express our needs differently. So criticism and defensiveness are by far the two most common, at least that I see in my practice, people coming in, complaining of partners being overly critical or overly defensive. Criticism is simply, it's a complaint that about what your partner is or isn't doing. And I would say the next version of that, like the more intense version of criticism, is contempt, which is more, kind of locating that complaint in your partner's character or who they are. So it's more of like a down, looking down on your partner, insulting them, somehow degrading their character. It's actually the worst of the four horsemen, they say. But criticism,
and it's pretty much when like you've made the mental shift to like you're not on your partner's team. Like you're a bad person, you're worse than me. Like I don't like you anymore, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, pretty much criticism and defensiveness. Also, you're not really on the same team when you're in criticism and defensiveness either. I mean, it's hard to feel really relational at that point if you're being criticized by your partner, right? So yeah, so defensiveness is the natural response to criticism, right? Like you want to protect whatever it is that you're being, where you're feeling attacked. And then stonewalling, the final one, is just, that's just kind of what it sounds like, where somebody just really emotionally shuts down, kind of turns into a stone wall, can't really reach them. It's actually we see it more often in men than women, but it's a form of emotional regulation. It's a strategy that people learn early on as a way to kind of like shut themselves off from feeling, because it feels too overwhelming.
Yeah.
So
and the way I sort of differentiate between defensiveness and stonewalling, and tell me if I'm doing this correctly, is stonewalling is checking out, right? It's just literally like metaphorically building a stone wall between you and your partner, and just like you're over there, I'm over here, right?
just disengaging. Yeah.
Yeah. Where defensiveness, I think, is more like, no, you're wrong. Whatever you're sharing with me, no, you're wrong, and it's just pushback, right? It's I'm not willing to listen. I'm not really willing to see your side of the story. I'm not disengaging, but I'm just, whatever you're trying to send my way, I'm just sending right back to you.
Yeah, I'm not willing to take in any of your perspective or, what you're trying to share. It's like, I can't be curious at all about what you might be trying to share with me. So they're all they're all protective states, right? They're all strategies that we use as a way to, try to get our needs met. That's the important thing. Like I'm not here to say that the four horsemen are, it's totally terrible and toxic if they're in your relationship. What we want to do is we want to help you become aware of them so you can get your arms around them and figure out how to express your needs in a different way. Because if they are allowed to persist in a relationship, we do know from the research that those forms of communication, those strategies are toxic over the long term if there's no intervention.
Yeah. So, all right, well, then let's talk about the intervention. So let's say, a couple comes to you and says, we're having trouble connecting, and you're doing, your early sessions, and you're seeing a few of the four horsemen around here. Like, how do you help people break the pattern and start developing something that's more constructive to what they want to have?
Yeah. Well, again, like I was saying earlier, the first step is really just really organizing the negative cycle for them. So yeah, I'm listening for, I'm hearing their stories. I'm kind of listening for, the patterns. I'm having them take me to where they get stuck. Most couples have a place, in their communication where they go, they can both kind of recite what happens and where they get stuck, and, where they don't have any success in sort of pushing through and feeling like they're actually getting to some kind of resolution. So I'm really trying to understand the pattern. I'm trying to reflect that back to them. I'm trying to understand how they each get triggered emotionally, what's happening for them, like really trying to listen for the emotion, because the emotion has a lot of information there for us to, to use and understand. I'm listening for the meaning that each partner has about the conflict, what it represents. And then obviously the protective strategies, what they do to, to manage the distress in the relationship. So in that, just in breaking it down and slowing it down and reflecting it back to them and helping them begin to kind of see it in a slightly different way, hopefully from maybe a different perspective, hopefully in a way that feels a little bit safer. If I'm helping them, or a good therapist is helping them, usually it can feel a little bit safer to start staying in the conversation a little bit longer. And sometimes even just in the first couple sessions, couples will start to feel some relief and just feeling, a sense of validation, or even if it's just through the therapist, they'll feel a sense of like, at least someone's getting it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe my partner isn't getting it yet, but at least, maybe the therapist seems to be getting it. So that begins to kind of lower the intensity a little bit so that we can start, chipping away a little bit more.
Okay. All right. So let's say you've done all that. You've clarified kind of the dynamics that create conflict for them, maybe help them understand a little bit about their responses and the impact they're having, and things are now on the table. As I understand it, and don't let me mischaracterize your approach here, but that something that's very important is story. I mean, human beings respond to stories, and I believe one of the things that you help them do once things are a little less emotionally charged is to try to help each partner really kind of get their story told clearly, so that hopefully the other person can start to understand it. You don't at this point necessarily need to fully agree with all of it. Like I might say, okay, I got a different version of reality, but at least I understand Ashley's version and I see where she's
Yeah.
coming from now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really helping. Yeah. Story, or like whatever their narrative is about the conflict and whatever it represents, right? We're trying to get to that kind of deeper meaning. And usually what we're trying to get to is, there's usually some negative view that each partner has either of themselves or of their partner in that. And we're trying to, kind of make that more explicit so that people can start understanding, kind of what the more vulnerable feelings are around this, or like if my meaning in a conflict is that, every time, every time, you're on your computer or you're working, like it's because you don't care about me, or you don't care about the relationship. Like that's a really painful place
Yes,
for me to
especially because
be.
you feel that way an awful lot
Yeah.
in a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just like, but like maybe you never were really even aware of that's how I felt, right?
Right.
Because I might just be criticizing you for working all the time and, kind of blaming you, but like underneath it there's more of there's something that's deeper there that, maybe a fear or a sadness that I'm having about the
Lost
disconnect.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So there's two things related to this that I think are really useful. And, again, I hope we're giving people, you know, good insight into sort of the science of therapy here so they can borrow some of these tools and use them in their own relationships. One is, I believe when you're doing all this and having people tell their stories and clarify their situation, heavy reliance on I statements, right? So in other words, if you're sitting down and saying, well, when my partner does this, he's being a real jerk and he's creating all this issue. Much better to say, when this happens, this is how I feel, right? I'm
That's the
experiencing this way, right?
Right. That's the antidote to criticism, right? So if I'm sitting here, pointing my finger at you and telling you all the things that you're doing wrong, you're not going to be able to take that in. You're not going to be able to hear it and be curious. You're going to naturally be defensive and feel blamed and feel attacked, right? So yes, using an I statement is a way to kind of, bring it back to, this is my experience. Like I feel really hurt when you are, you know, doing what you're doing, or, or I feel ignored, and that's a really painful place to be. And that's a more vulnerable thing to do, right? Is to
Mhm.
express my feeling around it. Like it's a lot easier to just sort of make you the bad guy. But a lot of times, when there's a lot of reactivity in a couple, it's just a sign that things aren't feeling safe, right? And so they're usually communicating from a place of, they're usually communicating from their protected places,
Right.
not from a place of vulnerability.
Right. A place of
So
hurt or a place of fear. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Then the other thing, and you have done a good job of making me become better at this practice, which actually, to your credit, I think I use a lot in my day job here at Thoughtful Money, is the practice of active listening, right? Where, as your partner is sharing their story, that you're just not letting them talk, but that you're actively listening to what they're saying. And I know there are exercises therapists will often do where, one partner shares their story or whatever they need to say. And then the other partner, after they're done, has to listen without interruption. And then after they're done, they have to basically deliver a synopsis back to the partner and say, here's what I heard you say. I'm not having to agree with it, but just here's what I heard you say. Did I capture what you said correctly? Right. And
Yeah.
it's an exercise to make sure that both parties get to fully say what they want, but that they know, hopefully, that their partner actually took it in. Now, again, it's not determining who's right or who's wrong. You're not even necessarily at this point making
Right.
any agreements on behavior change. It's just, do we understand each other well?
Yeah. Are we tracking each other? That's really that's about, how like emotional attunement to one another. And I always tell couples, like, it's never about who's right or who's wrong, right? But it is about like really trying to track one another, attune to one another. Like, there are really important things that both people are trying to express, but if they're not sending clear signals to one another, and there's a lot of like talking over one another, or just, the cycles really taking over again, like that chaos and that just sense of overwhelm can really take over. So it's just about slowing it down and helping them, helping two people really listen and take in. So active listening is a way, and that reflection is a way to kind of signal to your partner, like, I've got you, I'm tracking you.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's say, you've now brought the couple in, you've helped them de-escalate the emotion. They now understand each other a little bit better. You then get into what I believe you guys in the business call the repair work, right?
Mhm.
Where hopefully we understand each other more. We're still committed to trying to work through this. We're still committing to being on the same team, even though the emotions might still be a little bit raw right now. Um, I'd like to talk about how you help guide partners through repair. There are some elements from Gottman's work I might ask you about. I know a little bit less about EFT, so you can obviously bring that in too. But I know, Gottman has this concept of the sound relationship house, which has some useful steps in it. Um, uh, and maybe we can just sort of talk about the first three, and then you can go any way you like. Um, they talk about, once you understand each other's world, that you want to build what they call love maps, which is, okay, so we are where we are. Where do we want to go from here, right? The second is to share fondness and admiration, which is basically to start saying nice things about each other, right? You've maybe been, saying some pretty nasty things about each other, and maybe you're still a little raw. Might feel a little hard to switch into the nice gear at this moment in time, but it's a really key part of moving forward. And then the third thing is turning towards to each other versus turning away, which is both metaphoric and physical. It's amazing how different the dynamic can shift based upon how you're reacting to your partner when they're talking to you. And if you are literally turning towards them and engaging, makes a world of difference than if you're on your phone distracted or got your arms
Yeah.
crossed looking away,
Yeah.
right? So anyways, how do you help people with the repair?
Well, so everything you just described, like those are sort of like the lower levels of the sound relationship house, which are actually more about like having a strong foundation. So, which is, everything you mentioned is absolutely true. Like we want couples to, work on having more fondness and admiration and turning towards one another, making more bids for connection. All of those things are going to help couples feel more secure with one another, but repair really comes into the next level, which is around conflict management. So, we talked earlier about how conflict is normal. It's a normal part of any relationship. But what we know that the masters of relationship are doing differently than the disasters, or that they actually have effective ways of repairing the conflict. So the conflict that's naturally coming up in any relationship, and some couples have much higher levels, than others, but they still have high levels of happiness and good outcomes, but it's because they've got really good repair processes in place. And so basically what I'm doing in my office is, I'm like helping couples learn how to do that, have some success in, working through a repair conversation, because, most of us don't get that training growing up. We don't get it in school. So it's just, giving them the experience of having some success and working through a successful repair, and then helping them practice it and having it become, just part of their regular kind of toolkit of their relationship.
Okay.
So
Can you give an example of just what working through a repair process might be like?
yeah.
So,
So
real quick, I just want, to reiterate something you said, two things you said earlier. One is, what's can be very helpful about a therapist is, it's like a referee, right? So rather than a free-for-all game, you've got somebody there who's just kind of making sure that everybody's, following the rules,
mhm,
nobody's getting hurt too much, right? And that can be really decharging, which is great. The
mhm,
other thing you mentioned is, which people might not fully have understood what you mentioned, which is masters of relationships are great at bid connection, right? And there's this concept again, in Gottman, of like the emotional bank account, right? Every time you have a positive interaction with your partner, you make a deposit in the account. Every time you have a negative reaction, you make a withdrawal. And they kind of found out that like um, negative reactions have more impact than positive ones. So you need to have like, they said like, I think like 5 to 1. You want to have at least 5 positive interactions for each negative one in your relationship to kind of be like at break even, meaning
mhm,
to do a better
yeah,
job, you actually want to have a lot more positive than
yeah,
even that. And one of the things that the masters do really well is when your partner is trying to make a positive connection, that's called making a bid. And if you accept the bid and reflect it back and engage in the positive interaction, great, that makes a deposit. But if you ignore the bid or you're not paying attention and you miss it, there's a failed bid, and that's a negative interaction. You may not even be aware of it, but
mhm, mhm.
having this like conscious decision to say, we're going to work on making bids and receiving bids because we want to be putting deposits into the emotional bank account is an important part of this repair process, correct?
Well, I would say it's an important part of like having a healthy relationship, and it certainly will, help the repair process. But yeah, like making a lot of bids and having them go well, absolutely. It's just going to help like create more of a buffer, and it's going to help create more of a sense of connection between two people. And when the conflict arises, it's going to help two people, move through a repair a little more, probably with a little bit more grace and goodwill.
Okay, great. All right. So to the question, what does it look like when you're helping somebody
Yeah.
actually develop a repair plan?
So I mean, I would say at a really high level, it's just kind of what you would just sort of were talking about earlier around the active listening. In the beginning, we're just sort of like taking turns, sharing what each person's subjective reality was around whatever the incident was. Um, Usually, not surprisingly, two people come in and they'll have very different experiences of a conflict and what happened and what was said. And it's not about going back and figuring out who was right or who was wrong. Because we just know that like that there's no use in doing that. But it's understanding that both partners have a valid subjective reality. So we kind of want to find the truth in what both people are saying. And it's really, when I say the truth, I mean like the emotional truth, not the facts of what happened, but more like the emotional experience of each partner. So that's the first part, is just like really taking the time for each partner to get a chance to share, be heard, have the other person like take it in, reflect it back, make sure that, again, like we're just doing that tracking with one another so that, you know, both partners feel like, okay, I think he's getting it. You know, I think he's starting to feel a little bit more like he's at least acknowledging kind of why it makes sense, why I get so upset about X, Y, or Z. Right. And so that's the first stage. And then it's like really understanding what set each person off in the incident. Why did it escalate? We have to understand what the triggers are and kind of what the stories are related to those triggers that cause us to go into fight or flight. So it's taking the time to go through the triggers, and then you know, helping each couple kind of put it into the context of their negative cycle and say like, okay, you know, it's usually these conflicts are part of a pattern. So then we're looking at like, what did we each do? What was our contribution? What did we each contribute to the escalation? So it's like taking ownership. And then we move into, you know, how are we going to do it differently next time? Or what are we going to work on for next time? We know there's going to be a next time, right? Some version of it. It won't be exactly the same, but there's something's going to happen that's going to get us back into some kind of conflict or negative cycle. So what do we want to learn from this? What do we want to take away? What do we want to request of one another, you know, to keep in mind in order to make this go just a little bit better next time? So it's not about perfection. It's just about like, you know, incremental progress over time.
All right. And, you know, there's that quote from Carl Jung that has stuck with me, which, you know, a lot of what you're doing, again, is it's trying to put things on the table so that you can identify the patterns. It's kind of like an alcoholic, right? You can't get better until you admit that there's a problem, right? You can't break the pattern until you realize there's a pattern and you've identified what it is and what causes it. So Jung's quote was, I'm getting it probably a little bit wrong, but it was like, until you make the unconscious conscious, or maybe it was the subconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate, right? So what you're basically trying to do is to say, okay, look, once we can see and name the pattern, then we can talk about, all right, when this comes up again in the future, how can I behave differently so that I break that pattern and we don't have this thing following us into the rest of our relationship?
Yeah, and it's the whole idea behind that too is just, again, we're just trying to externalize that negative cycle. So and see it as like, it's not something that you're doing to me or that I'm doing to you. No one's, you know, it's not like one of us is to blame for it. We both co-create it. We both have responsibility around it. How do you and I align against that negative cycle? Right? Instead of aligning against one another or working against one another, we want to get on the same team and work against this negative cycle that keeps tripping us up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so you've helped people name it. They've now worked on, okay, when this comes up again in the future, what if I do this instead? The other partner hopefully says, yes, that will actually be a much better way for you to deal with it, right? So you've come up with your plan for how to try to you know, sidestep the old pattern. In addition to that, I'm going back to the higher levels of the Gottman relationship house here, but they talk about making life dreams come true and creating shared meaning. And to me, I kind of look at that as like, okay, once we've sort of stopped the bleeding, right, and then we've come up with a treatment plan for the immediate injury, right, then it's about, okay, how do we go forth and actually make this relationship stronger? How do we build up some armor around us? So whether it's this problem or another one in the future, we're going to be better off to be able to deal with it. So, I mean, a big part of this, right, is working on ways to realize mutual goals together, and then to kind of make the commitment to each other that, like, yeah, we're going to work on this together. We're going to commit to taking steps on this stuff going forward.
Because that's like part, like the good part of being in a relationship, right? It's like you want to have like all that shared meaning and the shared vision and the experience of like having a partner that you're doing it alongside with and working together with. And but the problem is that a lot of couples struggle to get to those levels because, those lower levels aren't being dealt with, right? Either we're not like super secure in our attachment bond. The cycle keeps winning, it keeps taking over. We're struggling to manage the conflict so that, there's a lot of resentment that gets built up over time. And then we just, maybe we avoid it, or maybe we just have these, negative experiences of conflict and doesn't go anywhere. So it makes it a lot harder if all that, if those lower levels aren't being tended to, it's much harder to have meaningful conversations around our future and what we want to do together, and how we see things. It's just like it requires too much vulnerability, right, to have those types of conversations if those lower levels of the sound relationship house aren't being tended to.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we've been talking largely in the context of couples, married couples, life partners, but really these tenets apply to any relationship that you're having,
Yeah.
close friends, et cetera, right? Siblings, that type of
Mhm.
thing. All right. I hate to start wrapping it up here, but I know that you have a client coming in just a couple of minutes, so we have to. But if we can, real quick, I mentioned at the beginning, kind of the big four that drive people into conflict are, money, sex, in-laws, and parenting, and money being the first one of those. I take it you must see a lot of people who have, conflict in their relationships around money, correct?
Yeah, it comes up. But again, like all of those are all, they're content areas that just that get us into whatever that emotional process is that's taking place between two people. So yes, certainly finances are, can be an issue between, or a very common issue, between two people. But it's just a gateway to kind of get us into a deeper, emotional process. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. But what I'm trying to do is help people see themselves here, and I imagine
Yeah.
a lot of people here, they, money is just one of those things that just naturally can put a lot of stress on you, and send people into perhaps a negative cycle. You're
Sure.
nodding as I'm saying
Yeah.
this, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is again, knowing you and your practice, um, obviously, the lack of money can be a big stressor. But I've
Mhm.
also noticed from hearing you share what you can about your clients is that you've had some clients that have practically infinite money, and there are lots of issues that can be created in a relationship by too much money, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Having I mean, yeah, having too much money can certainly lead, if you haven't done the work around kind of how to use it, how to, create kind of a shared understanding, shared meaning, shared purpose around it, um, it can certainly become problematic in a relationship.
Okay. Yeah, and just as, a couple of examples, I've heard people say, look, too much money really screws up your kids, or spouses can have very different opinions of how to treat money, right? They can have very incompatible expectations.
Or what they value
Obviously,
around it. Yeah, like how they
yeah,
want to spend it.
yeah. Some people have a scarcity mindset, and there's literally not enough money that will get them out of that until they deal with what's caused that scarcity mindset. You're nodding as I'm saying this. Family that hits you up for money. Another stress that people have, that maybe it's worth it just touching really briefly is, um, oftentimes one partner manages the money and feels the weight of that. And so there's, I'm sure, stress around
Mhm.
that. Um, but they also have the stress of like, hey, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, um, who's gonna take over this torch for me and my family?
Right.
I don't think my spouse is prepared, right? So maybe I can talk about that at the very end of this. That's one reason why you want a good financial advisor. And
Mhm.
interestingly, you and our financial advisors have gotten to know each other, through
Yeah.
both your relationship with me. And it's funny because I've heard you say a lot of the times, a good therapist is like, it has to be a part-time financial advisor. And I've certainly heard them say a good financial advisor has to be part-time therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of crossover there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, All right. Well, look, in wrapping up, I think you've given folks a good example or a good walkthrough of a lot of tools that they can use um, in their own relationships to hopefully constructive effect. Obviously, um, you know, people can get to a point where they're feeling overwhelmed and their own efforts aren't enough, and they might need a ref or a therapist. What's a good sign that, hey, maybe it's a good time to think about reaching out to a therapist?
I think anytime you're, either of you are feeling stuck, or you're feeling like you're having kind of a repetitive conflict or discussion, like you'll find little things will kind of get you into like, something bigger. Um, Something little will set off a bigger conflict. And it tends to just sort of have the same feeling and energy to it over and over and over again. That's usually a good sign that like you've got a negative cycle that's kind of,
Like we're just not getting
running the
past.
show.
Yeah, here we are
We're not
again.
getting past it.
Not
Yeah.
getting past it. Yeah.
It's winning. Yeah. The cycle's winning. Yeah.
Okay. And when people, go look for a therapist, do you have any advice on what they should look for?
For a couples therapist, I would say, I mean, word of mouth referral is always great. If you know someone else who's worked with the therapist that they like, that tends to usually go well. And if you don't have a referral from a trusted source, I would say just look for someone who is specifically trained in working with couples. You don't want to go to someone who doesn't have specific training in working with couples. So I feel the two gold standards in working with couples are Gottman and EFT. There's a few other good ones out there as well, but I'd say those are like the two biggest ones. So find somebody who's ideally trained in either one or both of those modalities.
Okay. And worth noting too that, it might be worth to talk to a couple different therapists, just because therapists are people, they have
Oh
their
yeah.
own approaches and takes on thing and what might
Oh yeah.
work.
You both have to feel comfortable with
Yeah.
somebody. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Most therapists offer like a free, an intro meeting. So
yeah, like an intro. Yeah, exactly. So you can kind of
yeah.
kick the tires to see. But yeah, that's a good part, which is a referral from a trusted source. Those usually are the best ways. But what worked for your friend might not work for you, or it might work for
Mhm.
you, but it might not work for your spouse. And you want to find somebody that's, both you and your partner, feel like you can connect with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And sorry for talking quickly. I just know we're short on time here.
Yeah.
There's also something that sometimes, you can, I mean, normal therapy generally, right, is you see a therapist once a week or so, maybe twice if you're in crisis. Um, but if you're really in crisis, or you just want to make a lot of progress quickly, there are these models of like intensive settings where you can
Mhm.
spend like a full day or a weekend together working through this stuff and really hopefully breaking
Yeah.
the dam. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a lot of therapists, including myself, are doing more of that, working with intensive models. Um, so it looks like, at least for me, it's usually a day or 1 or 2 days, depending on the couple, and what they're needing. And it's just yeah, exactly what you said. It's just an effective way of making a lot of progress in a short amount of time.
Okay. Well, I know, just from my audience, we have a lot of type A people in here that sometimes are like, hey, I I'm gunning to solve this problem. I don't want to drip through it. I want the sprint, not the marathon. That might be
Yeah.
a good way to go. All right. Well, look,
You got to be ready to dive in though, because it's a lot of work.
good point. Yeah. Don't consider it
Yeah.
unless you're really willing to commit to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is the point of question where I ask people, usually ask the guests, where can people follow you and your work? You practice here in California. Your therapy practice is pretty full. We didn't have you on here for this to be a commercial. We had you on here for this to be like a public service discussion. But people may have questions about,
Sure.
hey, how do I find a good therapist? Or this is what I'm wrestling with in my relationship. What do you think I should do? Is it okay if those people reach out to you and you just
Absolutely.
help guide them when you can?
Yeah. Taggartrelationships.com, my website. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I'll put when I edit this, I'll put the URL up there so folks know where to go.
Right.
And like I said, you're based here in California, your practice is pretty full. If folks are interested in working with you, you might not have room. And also, you can only work with people who are in California, correct? Because that's how it works. You have to be licensed in certain states. Okay, great. I'm just making sure everybody's aware. So in case you get deluged with requests, people know that it might be pretty hard. But you do have those intensive things that if folks want to learn more about that too, they can ask you about that. All
Absolutely.
right. So folks, to what I mentioned earlier, if you are perhaps wrestling with money issues that are creating stress in your relationship, then obviously if you're not solving those successfully yourself, work with a good therapist to get beyond those. But if you have a relationship where you are basically shouldering all the financial management, and you're concerned about having the torch passed if something were to happen to you, if you don't have a financial advisor who can step in that case, highly recommend that you seek one out. And if you just want to learn about the process for how you could do that, feel free to talk to one of the financial advisors that Thoughtful Money endorses. You see them on the channel with me every week. You can talk to them for free by filling out the short form at thoughtfulmoney.com and just put there in the notes, hey, I want to have a succession discussion, so that my spouse and my family's well taken care of if something's happened to me. That is it, sweetie. I think we got
Thank you,
you
sweetie.
out of here in time to see your patient.
It
Thanks
was
so
fun.
much for this. This was wonderful. And folks, if you'd like to see more deep dives like this into purpose, into health, let us know. And if so, I'll go find experts to talk with those about as well. But sweetie, this has been great. Thanks so much
Okay.
for giving us the time.
Thank
Everybody
you.
else, thanks so much for watching.